Alina was a bright young high school student who always carried herself with quiet confidence. She was known for her intelligence, kindness, and determination. Most evenings, she stayed late at school for activities, whether it was debate practice, student council, or preparing for a science fair. On this particular day, she had just finished a long debate session. The sun was slowly going down, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Her classmates had already left, and she walked alone with her backpack slung over her shoulder. Alina enjoyed the walk home. It gave her time to think about the day, about her speeches, and about her dreams of studying law one day. She was the kind of girl who believed that words could change lives, that knowledge could build bridges between people. She smiled softly as she rehearsed arguments in her head, imagining herself one day in a big courtroom, standing tall and speaking for those who had no voice. The streets were not too busy. Shops were closing, children were playing in front yards, and traffic lights flickered as cars passed by. Alina held her books tightly against her chest, her neat school uniform slightly wrinkled after a long day. Just as she turned the corner, a police car pulled up beside her. The car slowed, and two officers inside looked at her carefully. One of the officers, a tall man with a serious face, stepped out first. The other, younger and restless, followed quickly. "Hey you, stop right there," the tall officer called out. Alina stopped, surprised. She looked at them politely and said, "Yes, officer. Is something wrong?" The tall officer narrowed his eyes. "You match the description of someone reported in this area. A young person causing trouble, possibly involved in theft." Alina's eyes widened. She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I just came from school. I stayed late for debate practice. I'm on my way home." The younger officer crossed his arms and frowned. "Do you have an ID with you?" Alina hesitated. She remembered leaving her student ID card in her locker earlier because she didn't want to lose it during practice. She explained softly, "I don't have my school ID with me right now. It's in my locker. But I can give you the number, or you can call my school to confirm." The officers exchanged glances. Instead of listening to her calmly, they seemed to assume the worst. The younger one stepped closer. "Convenient. No ID, walking alone, matching the description. Sounds suspicious to me." Alina felt her heart beat faster, but she tried to remain calm. "I promise, I've done nothing wrong. You can check with the school principal. My debate coach knows I was there." But the officers weren't interested in listening. The tall one sighed, "We've had reports of someone stealing from a shop nearby. You fit the description. Until we clear this, you're coming with us." Alina's voice trembled, but she kept it respectful. "Please, sir, you must be mistaken. I have no connection to anything like that. I'm just a student. I live only a few streets away." The younger officer shook his head. "We can't take your word for it. Too many people try to talk their way out. We'll sort it out at the station." Before she could say another word, they pulled out handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking open made Alina freeze. She had never been in such a situation before. She raised her hand slightly, not wanting to make things worse, and whispered, "This isn't right. I didn't do anything." Some people walking on the street stopped to watch. A few whispered among themselves, surprised to see a schoolgirl being treated this way. A mother holding her child's hand frowned and muttered, "She looks like just a student." But no one dared step forward. Most only stared. The officers fastened the cuffs around Alina's wrists. She lowered her head, trying to hide her tears. She didn't want to appear weak, but the unfairness of the situation hit her hard. She kept telling herself, "Stay calm, it will be sorted out soon." The officers guided her toward the car. As they opened the door, she tried once more, her voice steady but pleading, Please, I need to call my father. He will explain everything. The younger officer smirked. Everyone has a story. Everyone says they know someone important. You'll have time to talk later. Alina bit her lip and sat in the back seat. The door shut with a heavy sound, and the car began moving. She looked out the window, the city lights blurring as her eyes filled with tears. She thought about her father, Mr. Rahman, who always told her to be brave, to never lose hope even in difficult times. What the officers didn't know was that her father wasn't just any man. He was one of the most trusted assistants of the president. He was the kind of person who worked long hours in government offices, advising, planning, and making sure the country's policies were carried out properly. People in high places respected him deeply. But Alina had never used her father's position as an excuse. She was proud of living like any other student. She never showed off, never bragged, and always believed she should be judged for her own actions, not her father's job. And now, sitting in the back of a police car, she wondered if that choice to stay ordinary had led her into this situation. At the same time, back at the government office, Mr. Rahman was finishing a late meeting. He often stayed late, going through reports and preparing notes for the president's upcoming engagements. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, expecting a message from his daughter saying she was home. But there was nothing. He frowned. Normally, Alina sent him a small text after school activities, just to let him know she was safe. He brushed it off at first, thinking she might have been busy. But as minutes turned into an hour, a sense of worry began to grow. He tried calling her, but the call went unanswered. He told himself to stay calm, but deep inside, his fatherly instincts told him something wasn't right. Meanwhile, the police car pulled into the station parking lot. The officers led Alina inside. The smell of paper, coffee, and old furniture filled the air. Officers sat at desks, typing or writing. Some looked up curiously at the sight of the schoolgirl in handcuffs. The tall officer filled out a form while the younger one told Alina to sit on a bench in the corner. She obeyed silently, though her mind raced. She thought of her father again, how worried he would be when he realized she wasn't home. She wanted to cry, but she held back. She knew she had to stay strong, even if no one believed her right now. She whispered softly to herself, "Dad will find me. He always does." What the officers saw as just another arrest was about to become something much bigger than they could imagine. The girl they treated as a suspect was not just an ordinary student. She was the daughter of a man whose phone call could change the course of their careers, a man whose voice carried weight in the most powerful office of the land. But for now, Alina sat quietly in that corner, her wrists sore from the cold metal, her heart heavy with fear but still holding on to hope. Alina sat quietly on the wooden bench inside the police station. Her school uniform looked even more wrinkled now, and her hands rested on her lap, still marked faintly from the handcuffs. The room was noisy with phones ringing, printers clicking, and officers moving back and forth. Yet, for her, time seemed to move painfully slow. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It had already been more than an hour since she was brought in, and no one had asked her any proper questions. The officers who arrested her were filling out papers, occasionally glancing her way. Alina tried to gather courage to speak again. She stood up slowly and approached the desk where the tall officer was writing. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a soft but steady voice. "May I please call my father now? He will be worried about me." The officer looked up with tired eyes. Instead of answering kindly, he smirked. "Everyone says they need to call someone. Sit down. You'll get your chance when we're done here." Alina pressed her lips together, holding back tears. She didn't want to cry in front of strangers. She wanted to show strength, just like her father had taught her. She turned back and sat again, folding her arms tightly around her books, which she had insisted on carrying even when they brought her in. Hours began to pass. Outside, night had already fallen. At home, her classmates were probably having dinner with their families, laughing and talking. But Alina sat in a police station, waiting. The longer she sat, the more she worried about her father. She imagined him checking his phone and not finding any message from her. And indeed, far away, Mr. Rahman was starting to panic. After his late meeting, he had called Alina again, and again there was no answer. He checked with her school principal. The principal confirmed Alina had stayed late for debate practice but left around sunset. That was more than 3 hours ago. Mr. Rahman stood up from his office chair, his face tense. He immediately called his assistant and said, "Alina hasn't come home. Find out where she was last seen. Call her friends, her teachers, everyone." His assistant hurried off, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Rahman paced across the room. He was not just a father but also a man who worked closely with the president. He had handled national crises, advised on important matters, and managed emergencies with calmness. But at that moment, he was only a worried father. He felt his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, back at the station, Alina tried once more. She raised her hand like a polite student asking a teacher a question. "Officer, please, just one phone call. I only need 1 minute. My father will clear this up." The younger officer, who had been typing on a computer, laughed. "Do you know how many people sit here and claim their dad is someone important? We hear it every day. You're no different." Alina's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she answered gently, "I'm not lying. I'm telling you the truth. My father works for the government. Please let me prove it." The tall officer shook his head. "Enough. Stop with the stories. You'll stay here until we finish checking." So she sat again, her spirit tested but not broken. She thought about her father's advice, "In moments of unfairness, don't lose your dignity. The truth will speak for itself." She repeated those words in her mind like a prayer. As time passed, the station grew quieter. Some officers left for the night shift to take over. The young officer yawned and stretched. He looked at Alina, who was still sitting straight, holding her books. Despite the uncomfortable bench, she looked calm, almost noble. Something about her didn't match the picture of a suspect. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Back at the government residence, Mr. Rahman's assistant returned with news. "Sir, we checked with the school guard. Alina left on foot. A few people saw her walking down Maple Street. After that, no one knows." Rahman's face grew darker. "Call the city security network. I want traffic camera footage from that area. And alert the local police stations." Within minutes, screens lit up with footage from traffic cameras. Rahman and his security staff scanned each frame carefully. Then, one of the guards pointed. "Sir, here she is. Maple Street, near the corner store." A police car stopped beside her. Rahman leaned in, his heart pounding. The footage clearly showed 2 officers stepping out and approaching Alina. A few minutes later, they led her to the car. His hand tightened into a fist. She was taken by police. The guard nodded carefully. "Yes, sir. We'll track which station." Rahman's voice was calm but carried steel. "Do it now. And prepare the car." Back at the station, Alina was still waiting. A kind-looking female officer passed by and gave her a small smile. She whispered, "Don't worry, dear. Things will be cleared soon." That small kindness almost broke Alina's resolve. She blinked away the tears that threatened to fall. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the hall. The chief of the station entered, looking slightly anxious. He had received a strange call minutes earlier from higher authorities, asking why a schoolgirl matching Alina's description was in custody. He hadn't even known about it until that moment. He quickly looked around and saw her sitting quietly. The chief frowned at the two officers. "What's this about?" The younger officer stood straighter. "Routine check, sir." She matched a description. The chief raised an eyebrow. "And you've kept her here for hours without verifying properly? Did she ask to call someone?" The tall officer hesitated. "She said her father is important." "We didn't believe her." The chief sighed heavily. Something didn't feel right. Before he could say more, the glass doors of the station opened. A group of men in suits entered briskly, followed by Mr. Raman himself. His face was calm but carried a quiet storm. The atmosphere in the station shifted instantly. Alina looked up. Her eyes widened with relief. "Dad," she whispered. Raman's eyes softened when he saw her. He walked straight to her, ignoring the stunned officers. He knelt beside her and touched her shoulder gently. "Are you all right, Alina?" She nodded, holding back her tears. "I'm fine now, Dad." The room went silent. Officers whispered among themselves. Who was this man? Why did he walk in with such authority? Why did everyone suddenly stand straighter? The answer was simple: this was no ordinary father. This was the president's trusted assistant, a man whose word could move mountains in the government. And the officers who had mocked his daughter were about to learn the weight of their mistake. The air inside the police station felt heavy. The two officers who had arrested Alina were frozen in place, unsure of what to do now that Mr. Raman had arrived. They had mocked her, doubted her words, and kept her waiting for hours. Now they realized she was not just an ordinary schoolgirl, she was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country. Alina stood slowly as her father placed a protective arm around her shoulder. She looked at him with relief in her eyes, whispering, "I told them, Dad. I asked to call you, but they didn't listen." Raman's jaw tightened. He did not shout or raise his voice. His silence was more frightening than anger. He turned his calm but piercing eyes toward the officers. "My daughter told you who she was, and you laughed at her." The tall officer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we thought she was making it up. Many suspects try to claim they know people in high positions." Raman took a slow breath, then answered firmly, "And because of your assumptions, you treated her like a criminal? Did you check with her school? Did you verify anything before dragging her here in handcuffs?" The younger officer shifted uneasily, his face pale. "We were only doing our job, sir. We thought she matched a description of a suspect nearby." Raman's voice dropped lower, each word sharp and deliberate. "Your job is not to humiliate innocent citizens. Your job is to serve and protect, not to mock and ignore. She is a student. A child. And yet you refused her basic right to make a phone call. Tell me, is that your training? Is that your idea of justice?" The station grew quiet. Other officers lowered their eyes, unwilling to look directly at him. Everyone in the room knew this was no ordinary complaint, this was a powerful man addressing a deep wrong. Alina held onto her father's arm, watching as the officers fumbled for words. She felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that her father had come for her, pride in how he carried himself, and sadness that her words had meant nothing until now. The chief of the station finally stepped forward, trying to control the situation. "Mr. Raman, I apologize deeply. This should not have happened. The officers acted without proper judgment. Please allow us to correct this mistake." Raman turned his gaze toward the chief. His expression remained calm but stern. "Correction will not erase what happened here. My daughter sat for hours, treated as if her truth meant nothing. What if she had been anyone else's daughter? Would she still be ignored? Would she still be denied a phone call? This is not just about Alina. This is about how you treat the people you are sworn to protect." The chief nodded quickly, sweat forming on his forehead. "You are right, sir. I take full responsibility. I will make sure this is investigated." Raman's voice softened slightly as he looked back at Alina. "We are leaving now." He gently guided her toward the door, but before stepping out, he paused and spoke once more to the officers. "You may not have known who she was. But that should not matter. Every citizen deserves respect. Remember that." With those words, he walked out with Alina, followed by his security staff. The entire station seemed to exhale once he left. The two officers sank into their chairs, realizing their careers were in serious danger. Outside, Alina breathed deeply, feeling the cool night air against her face. For the first time in hours, she felt free. She looked at her father and whispered, "I was scared, Dad. But I kept thinking of your words. I tried to stay calm." Raman stopped and looked at her tenderly. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You were very brave, Alina. I'm proud of you." The car door was opened for them, and they sat inside. As the car began to move, Raman held her hand. He didn't ask her to repeat everything that happened, he already knew enough. What mattered to him now was that she was safe. But inside his mind, he was making decisions. He knew this incident was bigger than just one mistake. It was proof of a problem in the system. Officers had ignored a citizen, denied her rights, and treated her harshly without proof. If it could happen to his daughter, it could happen to anyone. Back at the station, the chief called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. He scolded the two officers, his voice sharp with anger. "Do you realize what you've done? You treated the daughter of the president's assistant like a criminal. You ignored her words, her requests. Do you know the consequences of this?" The younger officer whispered, "We thought she was lying." The chief slammed his hand on the desk. "That is the problem. You thought. You didn't check, you didn't verify, you didn't respect basic rights. This isn't just about her identity. This is about your attitude toward people." The tall officer lowered his head. We made a mistake, sir." "Mistake?" The chief shook his head. "This is more than a mistake. This will go on record. And you may both face suspension." The two officers exchanged worried glances. For the first time, they realized the full weight of what they had done. Their pride, their quick judgment, their unwillingness to listen, it had all led to this moment. Meanwhile, at home, Alina finally changed out of her school uniform and sat at the dining table with her father. Her mother, who had been away visiting relatives, had returned quickly after hearing the news. She hugged Alina tightly, tears in her eyes. "My poor girl. You must have been so frightened." Alina leaned into her mother's arms but spoke softly, "I was, but I tried not to cry. I remembered what Dad always says about staying calm." Her mother kissed her forehead. "You are stronger than I ever imagined." As they sat together, Raman explained what would happen next. "I will file an official complaint tomorrow. Not for revenge, but to make sure this never happens again. No child should be treated this way. Not mine, not anyone's." Alina listened carefully. She admired her father's fairness. Even though he had every right to be angry, he wasn't just thinking about their family, he was thinking about all citizens. That night, as Alina lay in bed, she replayed the events in her mind. The cold bench, the dismissive voices, the laughter when she spoke the truth. It had been a painful experience. But she also remembered her father's arrival, the way he stood up for her, and the way the entire station had gone silent when he spoke. She realized something important: her father's strength didn't come only from his position. It came from his values, his belief in respect and fairness. And in that moment, Alina promised herself something. She would continue to study hard, to prepare for the future she dreamed of. One day, she would become a lawyer, and she would fight for justice not just for herself, but for everyone who couldn't fight for themselves. The officers thought they had silenced her, but instead, they had lit a fire in her heart. A fire that would one day burn bright enough to change lives. The next morning, the sun rose quietly, but inside the police station, the air was still tense from the night before. The two officers who had arrested Alina sat nervously at their desks, replaying the events in their heads. They hadn't slept much. Their mistake was now known not just to their chief but to senior officials. Rumors were spreading fast through the city about what had happened: a high school girl wrongly arrested, ignored, and mocked until her father arrived, a man whose name carried power in the highest halls of government. Meanwhile, Alina was at home, still feeling shaken but comforted by her family. Her father, Mr. Rahman, had woken early and was already preparing for the day. He dressed neatly, his face calm but determined. Over breakfast, Alina watched him carefully. "Dad," she asked softly, "are you angry at them?" Rahman looked at her gently. "I am disappointed, Alina. They treated you unfairly. But anger will not solve anything. What we need is accountability and change." Alina admired her father for this. Even though he had every reason to be furious, he chose fairness. "What will happen now?" she asked. Rahman sipped his tea and answered, "I will go back to the station today. Not to argue, but to make sure this incident is handled properly. Officers must learn from their mistakes, or nothing will improve." Her mother touched her hand and smiled faintly. "Your father has always believed in justice. That is why the president trusts him. And one day, you too will understand how important it is to stand for what's right." Alina nodded. She thought of the long hours she had spent on that wooden bench in the station. She remembered how invisible she had felt. Now she wanted others never to feel that way. Later that morning, Rahman arrived at the police station again. This time, he wasn't alone. Several senior officials from the Ministry of Justice came with him. They carried files and notebooks, ready to document everything. The moment Rahman entered, the chief of the station rushed to greet him nervously. "Mr. Rahman, welcome. Please, come to my office," the chief said, his voice slightly trembling. Rahman's steps were steady. He entered the office and sat down across from the chief. The officials took their places too. The two arresting officers were called in, their heads lowered, their hands shaking slightly. Rahman began, his tone calm but firm. "I want you to tell me exactly why my daughter was treated the way she was. Explain it to me, step by step." The tall officer spoke first, his voice unsure. "Sir, we received a call about a suspect near Maple Street. A young person, possibly involved in theft. When we saw your daughter, we thought she matched the description. She had no ID, so we decided to bring her in." Rahman leaned forward slightly. "And did you ask her where she was coming from?" The officer hesitated. "She said she was from school, but without ID," Rahman interrupted softly, "so her words meant nothing?" "You didn't call the school to confirm?" The younger officer spoke up quickly, trying to defend himself. "Sir, many suspects lie. They often claim to know people in important positions. She said her father worked in government. We thought it was a story." Rahman's eyes darkened, but his voice remained controlled. "And instead of verifying, you mocked her. You refused her a phone call. You made her sit for hours. That is not procedure. That is negligence." The room went quiet. The chief cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Rahman, I agree. This is unacceptable. We failed in our duty." Rahman turned his gaze to the chief. "This is not just about my daughter. This is about the way your officers see the public. They assumed guilt instead of innocence. They silenced her instead of listening. If it were not for her family, she might still be sitting in that corner, ignored. The officials from the ministry wrote everything down. The two officers looked down at the floor, ashamed. Finally, Raman stood. His presence filled the room. There must be consequences. If officers are not held accountable, they will repeat the same mistakes. Suspend them immediately while the investigation is carried out. The chief nodded quickly. Yes, sir. They will be suspended starting today. Raman's voice softened slightly. And one more thing. Begin training programs for all officers here. Teach them how to treat citizens with respect, regardless of their status. No child should be denied a voice. No citizen should be mocked for telling the truth. The officials murmured in agreement, and the chief promised to begin reforms. Later, as Raman left the station, many junior officers stood quietly, watching him with respect. They had never seen someone speak so strongly yet so calmly. It was not the power of shouting, but the power of truth. Outside, Alina was waiting in the car with her mother. When her father returned, she looked at him anxiously. What happened, Dad? Raman smiled gently and sat beside her. They admitted their mistakes. The officers are suspended. More importantly, there will be new training to make sure this never happens again. Alina's eyes brightened. Really? So maybe no other student will go through what I did? Raman nodded. That is the hope. Your pain will become a lesson for them. Alina felt a wave of pride. For the first time, she realized how her father's calmness and wisdom made such a difference. He didn't just fight for her, he was fighting for everyone. Back at school the next day, whispers spread among the students. Many had heard rumors that Alina had been arrested and then released. Some were shocked, some curious. A few classmates came up to her during lunch. Alina, is it true the police took you? One boy asked. Alina nodded quietly. Yes, but it was a misunderstanding. Another girl leaned forward. And your dad came to the station? People said the officers were terrified when they found out who he was. Alina smiled faintly. They were surprised, yes. But what matters is that they learned a lesson. My father made sure of it. Her classmates looked at her with new respect. Alina wasn't just the debate team star anymore. She was someone who had faced humiliation, stayed strong, and come out braver. That evening, as Alina walked home with her father again, she looked at him with admiration. Dad, I think I understand now. Power is not about making people afraid. It's about making people learn. Raman looked down at her proudly. Exactly, Alina. And one day, when you stand in a courtroom, you will carry that lesson with you. She smiled. I will, Dad. I promise. As they walked together, the city lights twinkled above them. The painful memory of the arrest was still fresh, but it no longer felt like a scar. It felt like the beginning of something greater, a spark that would guide Alina toward her future, a future where she would speak for fairness and truth. The story did not end with suspension letters or apologies. For Alina, the experience remained fresh in her memory. Every time she walked past the same corner where the police car had stopped her, she felt a small chill in her heart. But she also remembered her father's calm voice and steady presence at the station. That gave her courage. She reminded herself that what had happened was not the end of her story, it was the beginning of something larger. At home, life slowly returned to normal. Alina continued her schoolwork, preparing for debates, and attending classes. But she noticed something had changed inside her. She carried herself differently now. She no longer saw herself as just another student walking home with books in her hand. She realized she was someone who had endured injustice and had remained strong. She was someone who had learned firsthand how quickly people could judge without listening. Her father, Mr. Raman, made sure the matter did not disappear quietly. In the days that followed, meetings were held with higher officials. The Ministry of Justice confirmed that not only would the two officers face discipline, but new programs would be introduced for police across the city. Officers would be trained in empathy, respect, and proper procedures. They would be reminded that every citizen, young or old, rich or poor, deserved to be heard. When Raman explained this to Alina one evening, she listened carefully. They were sitting on the balcony, the stars bright in the sky. "Alina," he said gently, "what happened to you was wrong. But because of it, there will be change. Your voice, even when ignored at the station, will now echo in the halls of training rooms. Others will learn from what you endured." Alina looked at him thoughtfully. "So something good can come from something painful." Raman smiled softly. "Yes, my daughter. That is often how life works. What matters is how we respond." News of the incident spread quietly at first, but soon it became widely discussed. Journalists wrote about it, describing how a young girl had been treated unfairly, only for the truth to reveal her father's position. Many people were shocked that such behavior had taken place inside a police station. Others praised the girl's composure and her father's fairness. Headlines appeared in local papers: "High school girl wrongly arrested, father calls for police reform." Some articles highlighted how Alina could have easily let her father's position silence the issue with just a demand for apologies. But instead, Raman chose to turn it into a lesson for all. Citizens began talking about it at tea stalls, offices, and homes. Parents told their children the story, encouraging them to always speak the truth, no matter if others doubted them. At school, Alina became something of an example to her classmates. Her teachers noticed her stronger voice in class discussions. One teacher told her kindly, "Alina, you already had a gift for words. But now you speak with even more strength. That is the mark of someone who has lived through difficulty and turned it into wisdom." Her classmates often asked her questions. "How did you stay calm, Alina? Weren't you afraid?" one girl asked during lunch. Alina thought for a moment and answered, "Yes, I was afraid. But I remembered my father's advice: in unfair moments, dignity is more powerful than fear. I told myself to breathe, to wait, and to keep believing that truth would win." Her words stayed with many of them. They saw her not just as the debate team's shining star, but as someone who had lived what she preached. Meanwhile, the two officers who had arrested her sat at home during their suspension, reflecting on their actions. For the first time in their careers, they realized how damaging quick judgment could be. One of them confessed to a colleague later, "I thought I was just doing my job. But I see now I didn't listen. I treated her as if her voice had no value. That was wrong." In their absence, training programs began. Officers were shown examples of how small acts of listening could prevent large mistakes. Role-play sessions were held where officers practiced respectful questioning instead of rushing to assumptions. In every session, the story of the young high school girl was quietly referenced. Though her name was kept private, everyone knew who she was. Weeks later, Alina was invited to speak at a youth leadership event in her school district. At first, she was nervous. She wasn't used to standing in front of large groups outside of debate tournaments. But when she stood at the podium, looking at the young faces in the audience, she found her courage. She told her story not with anger, but with honesty. She described how she had been stopped, how she had been ignored, and how she had kept calm. She told them about her father's words and how he turned the incident into a lesson for everyone. Her closing words were simple: "Sometimes people will not believe you. Sometimes they will laugh at your truth. But if you stay calm and keep faith, truth has a way of shining through. Don't stop speaking. Don't stop believing in yourself." The audience erupted into applause. Teachers wiped away tears. Parents nodded with pride. Students looked at her with admiration, inspired by the strength of someone their own age. From that day forward, Alina wasn't just a bright student. She was a symbol of courage, dignity, and resilience. Her name began to be mentioned not only in her school but in community discussions about fairness and justice. At home, Raman watched her with pride. One evening he said, "You see, Alina, even though you were treated unfairly, you transformed it into hope for others. That is true strength." Alina smiled at him. "I think I want to keep using my words, Dad. Not just for debates, but for real life, for people who feel small, like I did in that station." Raman nodded. "And when you do, you will make this world better, step by step." The months rolled by, and though the painful memory never fully disappeared, it became part of her story, a story that shaped her future. She no longer saw herself only as a girl with dreams of becoming a lawyer. She now saw herself as someone who had already taken her first step into that path. She had stood in the face of unfairness and kept her dignity. Her experience reminded everyone around her, her family, her school, even the police, that respect must never depend on who someone is or who their parents are. It must be given to every person, at every moment. And so, the girl once ignored on a bench in a police station became the girl whose story taught a city a lesson. The officers who mocked her learned humility. The chief who apologized promised reforms. And Alina, still young but wise beyond her years, carried forward a quiet strength that would guide her for the rest of her life. What had started as an ordinary evening walk home turned into an unforgettable journey of truth, courage, and change.